Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to this program. Tonight, I would like to discuss the issue of sanctions. This issue has been uh, on the national agenda ever since the sanctions were imposed in 2001. What is disappointing here is that the nation, Zimbabweans in general, have failed to analyze the issue and come to a decisive conclusion. And hence the reason why ZANU PF have taken full advantage of that and has kept the issue on the national agenda. It is a destruction, and it is ZANU PF alone that benefits from the destruction. From the destruction, we should be concentrating on the burning issues. We should have moved on by now on this issue of sanctions, and yet here we are. We're still here. Tonight, I've got Benjamin who is going to help us analyze this issue. But before I call Benjamin to have his input, we'll listen to this video uh, of the issue of sanctions being discussed by this South African television program. Listen to this.
Affairs, Shwane University, and in Johannesburg, Rutendo Matinyarare, marketing strategist and anti-sanctions campaigner. A warm welcome to you both to the program. Let me start off with you, Professor Mukanza. Looking at those sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe since way back in 2001, are those sanctions helping Zimbabweans at all?
I think by and large, the sanctions that were imposed on Zimbabwe are not in any way helping Zimbabweans. If anything, they are giving the ruling elite an excuse for misgovernance. They are giving the ruling elite, cheap campaigning material. If you look at the material condition, nothing really has changed for the people of Zimbabwe. If anything, things have gone worse. But why I further say something are not working is that the so-called targeted people, those that are targeted with sanctions, are not affected in any way. They continue to live in their lavish ways. So by and large, I argue that the sanctions as an instrument to influence political behavior of the ruling elite in Zimbabwe have not worked.
Rutendo, what's your view here? Is there a justification of the continued imposition of these sanctions?
The Special Rapporteur of the UN Human Rights Council came to Zimbabwe and declared the sanctions upon Zimbabwe illegal. There are also a number of resolutions that include 44-215 and 34-13 that have said that unilateral sanctions imposed by nations upon other nations without the consultation of the UN and without the UN instituting those sanctions is illegal. So sanctions are not a tool to try and influence political behavior, because in 1989 they created a resolution that is called 44-215 that actually outlawed the use of coercive economic measures, especially upon third world countries that were former colonies, by Western countries to influence their political demeanor. So the UN felt that Western countries were utilizing the power that they accumulated from colonialism to actually continue to administer their former colonies by utilizing these coercive measures. So they're illegal. And they also are collective punishment of civilians, thus crimes against humanity by persecution. There is no way that a crime against humanity such as persecution can be used to bring any change that is positive. In fact, it is a form of illegal warfare according to the Geneva Convention.
So what I'm hearing, Rutendo, though, is that the sanctions at this point against Zimbabwe are actually being used, as a tool, as a symbolic tool, not really to achieve the intended means. I mean, did the sanctions here then miss the target of what they were intended to do?
They are not missing the target of what they intended to do, because sanctions were imposed on Zimbabwe to give an advantage to the opposition members. They were targeted on the government of Zimbabwe, its institutions, its parastatals, to cripple that government from undertaking the delivery of services and the development of the country, so that the Zimbabwean people would be frustrated and then vote for the opposition political parties. So it's a form of terrorism, if not a form of persecution or punishment of civilians to force them to vote for the opposition. And in that way, it has actually helped the opposition to manage all our urban municipalities, which we believe is a contravention of international law. It is a contravention of human rights when a political party can use coercive economic measures and persecution to force people to vote for it.
Professor Mukonza, is that your thoughts as well? Like, this has actually given the opposition a...
There we have it. Benjamin, what's your reaction to that?
Thank you for having me on the program. Hello, viewers. Thank you for joining us. It's a very interesting topic because it's something that has been quoted out of context for a number of years, 22 years to be precise. Sanctions, the reason why sanctions were placed, I agree with you. A lot of people have confusion in that regard, or they actually do not know why these targeted sanctions were imposed on Zimbabwe. They were imposed in 2001. Why? Because of, we could say there was no longer rule of law or democracy, right? There was violence. Yes, we know, we look at it, it happened during the time where Zimbabwe was taking land. Well, it was the land reform program when Zimbabwe was saying they were taking the land back from the white oppressors, the white government, the white people that were still in Zimbabwe, right? But then uh, there was a way, or there should have been uh, a better way of conducting that business, if you look at it. So it, the, there was a lot of things, a lot of commotion that was happening, the violence, the looting by certain individuals. I mean, we all know others ended up having 5, 6, 7 farms. It was, people were getting beaten up left, right, and center, whether it was white, whether it was black. If you,
Well,
it was,
on that point, I agree with you. But in this particular case, let's just focus on the issue of, are sanctions illegal or not? Because ZANU-PF, of course, would say they were imposed for these and these, for whatever reasons, and that is contrary to what the Western themselves would say the reason why they imposed the sanctions. We could debate on who is right, who is saying something that's valid, but just come back to the issue of, are sanctions legal or not? What is your view on that?
okay, thank you very much. So, if you look at the quotation that the professor, what is Professor Rutendo, he quoted, I think it was from, he quoted to say that, you know, the imposition of sanctions by another, on another country, by another country, is illegal. And true, it is illegal. So it in my opinion, I would say to some extent,
I think it's important to emphasize on that point that you are saying the UN said they were illegal in terms of international law. In other words, he is saying only the UN can impose sanctions on another UN member country.
yes, that is
Yeah,
that is
but that is if the UN itself agree to impose those sanctions.
and
If we go according to that, then we are saying no nation should have its own laws. We cannot say that the Americans, for instance, cannot impose sanctions on Russia, or
yes,
Ukraine cannot impose sanctions on Russia, even after Russia has invaded their country.
yes. This was where I was going with it, right? So if you look at it in that regard now, because I was going to give the example of Ukraine and Russia, right? The Russians have actually went and invaded. No country can stand and and support or such an action. So to say that sanctions given on Russia by the Americans, the European Union, the British government is illegal. That would be that would be wrong. So we have to take sanctions which in within the context of of what was the reason for the sanctions in the first place. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
No, I think what I'm saying is they are legal because even the sanctions that were imposed on Russia, they were not imposed by the UN. They were imposed by individual countries.
Yes, that's true.
So to say that if we were to go using the argument that our friend was giving there, if we were to go to the UN, the UN would say, well, we never imposed those sanctions, and therefore then they are illegal. A country cannot be forced to trade with another country. In fact, if anything at all, the illegal part of it, what is worse, imposing sanctions or invading another country and imposing a war, killing people on that country. So in this particular case, we'll end up with a situation where we are saying, oh, the Americans have done something illegal, and yet we say nothing about what Russia has done, which is
Yes,
the root cause of those sanctions.
yes, that is true. So this is why I'm saying he kind of twisted it so that it would appear in the context that he wanted, right? So because I would like to always uh, before we look at the legal or the illegal part, we should look at what was the cause behind. Why was, for example, why was Russia sanctioned? Because it did something that was that that is that took away the right for for the Ukrainians. You know what I mean? The privilege, the democracy, their rights. By invading, they took away the rights. They displaced the Ukrainians. That was the reason. Why was Zimbabwe uh, sanctioned? Right? It was because of the violence, the looting by certain individuals. Right? The, the whole process that led
Well,
to the sanctions.
if you go down that route, Benjamin, I think you walk yourself into a trap. Because if you were to ask the Russians, they will say they had to invade Ukraine to stop Ukraine becoming a threat to Russia. So who is now going to judge whether that was the truth, or is it just a manufactured reason? But the point I was trying to make there is we have got to decide whether it's like you and me. If you were to say, I don't want you in my house, it's your house. We cannot say, oh no, no, you should allow me to come walk into your house as and when I please. You know, because we want to have free trade. I can trade. You can trade with whoever you like.
Yes, with that I agree with you. This is why I said it's within the context that you take the sanctions and the meaning of the word sanctions. I very much agree with you, right? To say if I sanction, oh, let me use another word that is simple. If I say, like you said, if I say I don't want you to come into my house or to come within my boundaries, right? It is my decision at the end of the day. I choose who I want to deal with and whom I don't want to deal with, right? Just like the same way, if you look at it in the Zimbabwe context, they were sanctioned by America. They are sanctioned by the British government, right? And then this is also during the Mugabe era. He decided, no, since you guys are sanctioning me, I will go and look for what? For other people, right? Other friends. And then he developed the Look East policy. So, which means he had already made a backup plan. So, the reason to start crying about the sanctions are illegal, they are arm twisting, it's it's to suit them.
Yeah, but are you suggesting then that if uh, uh, if he didn't have a backup plan, the sanctions would be illegal?
No, 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 no. It was for him to look for the backup plan. Because if somebody says, I don't want,
Yeah, but even if he didn't have a backup plan, are you saying the sanctions then would be illegal?
no, 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 no. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you took the way like what Mr. The professor said, he twisted it into his own context, right? To say there's, I mean, if you look at it, sometimes it will say there is uh, free trade. And when we say free trade, the word free trade would probably mean you can you can do as you please as long as you know as goods are moving between two people or there's an agreement. But there is there's a certain way and there are rules by which you have to follow to get to 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 what we can term free trade. You cannot twist something just to suit you. Just the same way when you talk about sanctions being illegal, right? It depends on the context that you are taking it from. And in this case, he is he's using it to his own advantage.
Yeah, but no, but Benji, I think this is where most people are getting it wrong. It doesn't depend on any context.
Exactly.
There is no such thing as it depends on what day of the what which time of the year it is. No, it doesn't. It doesn't depend on whether or not the West's interpretation or the reason they are giving for imposing sanctions make sense or they don't. When it comes to trade, something like trade, surely it's up to a country to say, okay, we will do trade with you. In this particular case, by imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, say the Americans, if that meant Zimbabwe could not borrow money or from any of the financial institutions that America controls, then if Zimbabwe is in a similar position, they could impose the same situation as well and say no American can borrow money from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. No Zimbabwean company should trade with any American company. They are free to do that. They can retaliate. But what we cannot say is to stand around and say, oh, the only legal sanctions are those imposed by the UN. That is what is wrong with this argument. The argument is the Americans did actually try to get the UN to impose sanctions on Zimbabwe. And it was countries like Russia and China that vetoed that resolution. Just as much as when the West imposed sanctions on Russia after Russia invaded Ukraine early this year, they tried to get the UN to impose sanctions on Russia. And Russia, because it's a permanent member in the United Nations, it was able to veto those sanctions. And therefore, then they are not, all the sanctions that have been imposed are not imposed by the UN. They have not been approved by the UN. So, strictly speaking, if we're talking of strictly of international law as administered by the UN, those sanctions are illegal. But we cannot define legality only on the basis of what the UN says.
Yes,
That is the argument.
yes, that
You
that
are to
that much
got
I
to
agree.
have the right to, as a country, to say what you have done, we disapprove of it, to the point where our normal relationship cannot continue as if nothing has happened. And I
Yes,
think
because
every country has got that right to do that. And
yes,
so
with
this issue of these sanctions are illegal, I think if somebody's going to use that word, they've got to justify according to UN international law, because the UN itself is controlled by five permanent members who will decide if they veto something, it means that law does not apply to them. But we can't have that one. Is That is what is wrong with the UN. That is what has weakened the UN, because you have had a situation where the UN, these five permanent members, have now put themselves above the law, because they can always veto anything that they don't like. And once they've vetoed it, the UN is helpless.
yes,
But we
with that
can't
with
have
that I agree. I agree with you completely to say, yeah, unfortunately, this is the with the situation that we are facing right now is these sanctions are being taken in different contexts. It's just the same like we were talking about. Let's give it a proper example of like free trade, right? Anybody is allowed to trade, but then we give it another example to say there is what we term blood diamonds, right? For example, right? Some countries will not want to be a part of the purchase of diamonds that have come from an area that has gone through a lot of bloodshed to get the produce, or child labor, right? It is my decision to wash my hands to say I will not partake of that, but that does not necessarily mean there is nobody that is going to buy. There is definitely somebody that is going to buy. So it is now up to you as 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 a country that has been sanctioned to say, okay, these people do not want to do trade because of so and so and so. Let me go and look for the next alternative. So by now coming to use sanctions to say these sanctions are illegal because, for example, this is what the professor said. It is weakened the institution. Of course, I would not agree with him on that. So it depends how you twist it.
Okay, well, can we move on to the next item? which is again a contentious one. After 20 years plus, can we still really argue that sanctions are the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown?
Of course not. We cannot say that the root cause are sanctions, because if we are to start from, let's look at from independence. Basically, there were a lot of unsanctioned purchases that were done, or and unsanctioned deals, things that happened under the table. We take, for example, when Zimbabwe gained independence, then President Robert Mugabe, uh, gave his ministers motor vehicles, which were not budgeted for. We look at it, uh, the war veterans were given 50,000 payouts, which were not budgeted for. We look at some some things that happened within these institutions that he was talking about. We look at the the Kumbirai Kangai GMB debacle, right? We look at what Gideon Gono recently. Gideon Gono had an interview, and he blamed. He also decided to not take the blame for Zimbabwe's economic meltdown, by saying he decided to blame the elephant in the room, and he did not want to point out the elephant in the room. So we cannot say service delivery was you know was caused because of sanctions. It was already happening before the sanctions came into effect. So there's a lot of, we could talk of a lot of bad decisions that led to Zimbabwe's economic meltdown. To say
So you are saying corruption is responsible for the economic meltdown?
corruption is the root cause. If we were to use, we would remove sanctions and we would say corruption is the root cause. I mean, right now, these are situations that happened back then. Right now, we have uh, probably our viewers, if they don't have solar panels or generators outside, they don't have electricity. Why? But somebody is sitting on $10 million, when he was supposed to have purchased solar panels to help the grid. We will not go into naming names, but there's a lot of tenders that have that have gone out to, to the people, and they have been termed very legal and went through due process. But service delivery right now has not been forthcoming. So how can we say sanctions when we ourselves are giving out tenders and we are not seeing the delivery?
Okay. Well, I think the issue of the case of sanctions being the root cause of the Zimbabwe's economic meltdown has never been really fully stated. But I was going to take on to the next one. Zimbabwe, before independence, when it was Rhodesia, it the U, the UN imposed sanctions on the country, economic sanctions, worse than the economic sanctions that were actually the ZANU-PF regime faced from the individual countries. The distinction between UN approved sanctions and sanctions imposed by an individual country is that the UN, all members of the UN, are compelled to observe those sanctions. Take, for instance, trade with Zimbabwe, say oil. All countries, members of the UN, were compelled to stop trading with Rhodesia in terms of selling them oil. In this particular case, the individual countries that impose sanctions on Zimbabwe, there is nothing that stopped the Zimbabwe government trading with the rest of all the other nations that did not impose the same sanctions on Zimbabwe. So that was one issue. But the point there is the UN sanctions were even tougher, that were imposed on Rhodesia were even tougher than the sanctions that were imposed by the West on Zimbabwe. And yet, the same nationalists, ZANU PF nationalists, are the ones who were putting pressure on the UN to impose sanctions as part of fighting the white minority rule. And now the same people are saying, oh, no, no, you cannot put sanctions, even if they are less uh, vigorous than the ones imposed on Rhodesia. There's reasons behind why we justified every black or most blacks justified imposing sanctions on Rhodesia was that it was a way of ending the white minority rule. Because the white minority rule, one of the things that they were renowned for is that they denied the blacks, the black majority, any meaningful role, meaningful say in the governance of the country. Blacks before independence did not have a vote, for instance. ZANU PF is doing exactly the same thing. And why the same people are now turning around and pretending that is not the case is beggars belief. Even SADC itself in 2008 had to sanction the ZANU PF regime by forcing it to sign the global political agreement because the regime had failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections in 2008. So there is a lot of contradiction here. But for anyone to be having this debate 20 years on, that is what bothers me. Surely those arguments should have been put on the table and everyone should have seen them. What do you think of the next issue of ZANU PF is using sanctions as an excuse?
Yes, yes, I do agree very much to say that the 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 use of sanctions has become sort of like a slogan or a way to, when somebody hides behind a finger to say everything that has befallen us that is bad is is caused by somebody else other than me. you know So- but then if you look at the what happened in the past leading to the events to come to the sanction, it's plain and simple to actually see the reason. Nobody can just say, I don't want to be a friend with you, or I do not want to do business with you when you are a very, very good person. I don't think anybody is like that, but unfortunately, like I said before, uh, the professor and other people have decided to twist the sanctions, the word sanctions, to mean the context that they would use to justify their failure.
Okay, thanks very much. I would like to welcome Godfrey. Um, Sorry, Godfrey, I don't know whether you have been able to listen to the interview on South African television there of these two Zimbabweans discussing this issue. We started by playing that video, but I hope you had the opportunity. But you're joining us now in the middle of it, so we'll just continue on. I don't know whether Godfrey want to comment on this, specifically the issue of ZANU-PF using sanctions. It's become fake news, and why the opposition has failed to make an impact. Because ZANU-PF, without doubt, ZANU-PF has been able to mobilize and make people believe that sanctions are the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown, and yet the opposition have failed. Why do you think specifically the opposition have failed to articulate on the issue of sanctions?
It's because ZANU-PF has convinced many people, we can even say the grassroots, that sanctions are the reason for your suffering. And many do believe that. And when you talk to the actual people within that that section of grassroots, we would call grassroots, they cannot explain how they are being affected or even what sanctions are. You find many cases where they have to demonstrate against these sanctions. They cannot even articulate what sanctions are and how they are affecting them.
Yeah, but Godfrey, to zoom in on the opposition itself, why have they failed to articulate and come up with a narrative to explain to people what sanctions are, and that what ZANU-PF is saying is just fake news? Why have they failed?
We can say, we can say on the main media, they have no access to that, so they cannot reach a wider variety of people. I can say that it's because they haven't got access to the media.
Yeah, but Godfrey, I think we also cannot pretend that you and me know opposition have at one time called for the imposition of the sanctions, and they've since changed their position. They've been calling for the lifting of the sanctions, and some of them who have defected to join ZANU-PF, if not outwardly, but at least in practice, have even come out and said, oh, it was a big mistake calling for the imposition of sanctions. We cannot deny that. That opposition, that position, those seems to be transient positions of the opposition, it's been there. Why?
I think they think if they talk about sanctions, they want to kill it off by also aligning with ZANU-PF, whilst they actually know that it's not the cause. Because they just feel if they don't talk about that, ZANU-PF comes in stronger on that narrative. So I don't think they are siding with ZANU because they actually believe it is the cause. But maybe they want to kill that the ZANU-PF propaganda on that. And because ZANU-PF, whilst they are pushing for that against the sanctions. They are in another way killing the opposition. So
Benjamin, I know that you want to
opposition is
have a
hamstrung.
say in that one.
Yeah, yes, I would like to add to say I agree with him to say, uh, you know, the opposition, they do not have access to, you know, the media service, like, you know, like out in the rural areas, you don't find televisions, but mainly you find radios. And you know, I'm hoping to say every household has got some form of, you know, a radio or a television. So you find this is the narrative of sanctions as is like a drum that is being beat in a certain way, right, by just that same individual. So people have not really
Yeah, but
heard
Benjamin,
somebody else play,
I think you are escaping the
right?
point that I've asked here. In this
Yes,
particular case, we have also said
I'm getting there. I'm
no.
getting
Let me be more specific. We have also said that the opposition has never been consistent on the issue of sanctions. So having even if there are televisions in the rural areas, they would have sent the same confused message. The question then is why has the opposition been wishy-washy on the issue of sanctions?
this is you find I would like to take you back during the GNU. When we were under the GNU, there was no talk about these sanctions. There was very little, if there was very little talk about these sanctions, right?
No, there
Both,
was talk about it.
sorry?
There was talk about it. MDC's position during the GNU, they joined ZANU PF in calling for the lifting of sanctions. That was the opposition's position.
Yes, but it wasn't as loud as, you know, the excuses that we are getting every day now, right? But my point is, for the opposition, let's not forget our opposition. Our opposition is not sure of exactly who they are. They don't really have an identity, to say the least, right? So with these guys, they are neither for or against. It just depends on the situation. Like you said, they were very much for the lifting of the sanctions at that time. Why? Probably it was because they were part and parcel of the what? Of the gravy trade, right? They did not see the need for it. Right now, uh, before the split of MDC, right? To some left MDC to form a new party, which is the Triple C. They were very much. They were some of the guys that are actually there. Some of the guys that brought about cry for to say bring sanction, add more, if I'm not mistaken, right? But these are the same people now that are saying sanctions are are detrimental to our livelihood. So you tend to look at now to say what has changed that position, to say at one moment you are the one that is bringing to cry to say bring the sanctions in, and then the next minute you are saying these sanctions are illegal. So which means you are saying you brought illegal sanctions. If you were to look at it in that context, this
What,
would
did you
show.
have something to say there?
I just think they want to kill off this argument of sanctions by sort of agreeing with them, but without them being lifted.
How are they killing it?
By agreeing with them, now ZANU cannot say the opposition is calling for sanctions.
And they killed that. Don't you think that comes back to what I was saying, that many people out there are confused about the effects of sanctions some of them now believe the ZANU-PF narrative that they are the root cause of the country's economic meltdown, whereas in reality they are not. But that misunderstanding of the issue has arisen because the opposition themselves have failed to come up with a narrative of what the sanctions are and what their effects are. And this dithering from one position to another, with the direction of the wind. One, during the GNU, they were calling for the sanctions to be lifted. Now, some are calling for the sanctions to be lifted. Some are still saying the sanctions should remain. Some of them, like Obed Kutu, who have now officially joined ZANU-PF, are even going to the extent of saying calling for sanctions was a big mistake. Don't you think that is what is causing confusion to the ordinary people?
Yes, it will cause confusion, but that confusion, where does it lead to? Does it lead to more support for ZANU or what? But the sanctions will still be there.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were talking of confusion to the ordinary people. Now they believe this ZANU-PF narrative. You are the one who were talking of how some people were demonstrating for the lifting of the sanctions, but when you ask them, what are sanctions, they don't know. So the ordinary person has been confused because the opposition, they failed to come up with an articulate position on what sanctions are, what their purposes are, and in terms of the economy, what is causing the economic meltdown? Is it sanctions? Is it corruption? Is it mismanagement? Those have not been articulated. The only thing that has been articulated is the ZANU-PF position.
Yes, unfortunately, with the opposition that we have, like I said before, it lacks our opposition lacks spine. It hasn't got backbone. 1 minute, they are the guys that actually asked for these sanctions. Why did they ask for the sanction in the first place? Right? They have since forgotten about that. Right? What has changed for you to start crying to remove the sanctions or to join the opposite, to join ZANU-PF into crying to say, let us remove these sanctions? What has changed? So you're very right to say it's a wishy-washy opposition. They lack spine. They never did quite articulate why they brought all the sanctions and why now do they want them removed. So yes, it is confusing to the ordinary person.
Okay, the Godfrey, I don't know whether you want to comment on what is it that the ordinary person, ordinary Zimbabweans should have done.
With regards to what?
Well, I mean, in this particular case, let's face it, as a people, we've let ourselves down. People do believe, like you correctly said, in the sanctions as the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown. They believe in ZANU-PF's narrative. They also have been confused by the opposition's confused position, dithering, wishy-washy position. But surely, as a people, after 20 years, can we really justify that people by now they should have failed to figure it out for themselves? That corruption is the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown, and still believe the ZANU-PF narrative that it is sanctioned.
Yeah, if there was fair access to media, I think people should have tried to show that it's not sanctions, that it's corruption. and also highlight the areas that are not affected by sanctions, where say you find people importing vehicles, very expensive vehicles, actually hammering on those areas that no, it's not corruption, but it's not sanctions, but it's corruption, because others, other areas are not affected. There's no reason why only when you look at hospitals that that's where sanctions should affect the normal operations of the services that they are supposed to deliver.
On that point, Godfrey, I'll take you. I'll accept the lack of a free, independent media would have had an effect, particularly for the rural people who are only are subjected to the ZANU-PF propaganda. But what about the Zimbabweans in the diaspora who have got access to much more information? You know, the intellectuals, we have got internet. They can see for themselves what is happening. Why is it that even among people in the diaspora, you still have some who believe that sanctions are the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown?
Yeah. If you want to then extrapolate that into opposition, then it's not only opposition, but it's you and me that are tending to go along with the ZANU narrative that yes, it's true that you find some other people that are supposed to be enlightened. They believe that sanctions are really the reason why Zimbabwe has gone down economically.
Yeah, but that's what I'm asking now. Let's cross-examine why is it that people, the intellectuals who are in Zimbabwe or outside the country, many of them still believe the ZANU-PF narrative, which is clearly, I mean, after 20 years, you know, it's absurd that somebody will still see the blatant rigging, the blatant looting, the gross mismanagement, case after case after case, and yet they still want to believe that somehow the problem is is sanctions.
Maybe we can ask why ZANU-PF has managed to push their propaganda stronger. I just want to believe it's because they got access to the main channels of the media.
If I may join the conversation and
Yeah.
add something and say, you know, there's been these anti-sanction marches that we have been seeing, and they have been broadcast even on the internet. And when you see, you know, the interviewers asking just the ordinary people in the street to say, what are you doing here? What is this whole gathering all about? I am telling you, sometimes it's a laughing, it's a laughing matter. You end up laughing your brains out. But to, to say it's quite sad that most people, you know, do not know what this whole thing is all about. What are sanctions? What is a sanction in the first place? People do not know, right? So, as a people, in that regard, we have failed to try and find out for ourselves what is sanction, what are sanctions, what was the purpose of sanctions. And this is where we come back to say, you know, the MDC Triple C, when they were calling out for these sanctions, they never did educate people enough to to show them what these things were about. And ZANU-PF did exactly the opposite. They went and they taught people their own narrative, and hence, you know, it's now something that is that has taken to them to actually believe that this is the cause of the problem, right? And then now to our to the diasporans, right? Our let's say our more open-minded, more elite individuals. Why have they let themselves down? I think people have got to an extent where they see no need for this for these sanctions and to continue using sanctions as an excuse for poor governance and corruption and the list goes on. So you find out people are now at a stage where we would rather have the sanctions removed and kill the noise and let it be open, let it be out there in the open to see that sanctions were not the cause of the problem. Rather, this is the cause of the problem.
Well, I hear that argument, Benjamin. I hear it. But what I'm saying to you is, okay, let's follow up on that point. That by saying let's have the sanctions lifted, that will kill the noise. If sanctions have nothing to do with economic meltdown, and if sanctions were put there for a good purpose of trying to put pressure on ZANU-PF to reform, why would you want them lifted? Just to do what ZANU-PF is calling for.
I believe it would actually help to open other people's eyes to see, what is people have different views. Let us agree on that. People have different views. Some people actually, honestly, in all honesty, actually believe that sanctions are the problem of Zimbabwe. Some people, in all honesty, that is because this is what they have been taught, and they have not done any research for themselves to find out what exactly is happening. Right? Let us give them that benefit of the doubt. But then to actually say to the other people that actually know that this is not true, to say sanctions are the problem of Zimbabwe and to keep quiet about it, that is a sin of omission.
Godfrey, do you believe if we lift off the sanctions, the noise from ZANU-PF will stop?
So there is a lot of crackling sound that is coming on my end. I don't know if it's also affecting you. But I just wanted to add something which I don't think the sanctions were put in place.
Okay. Sorry, gentlemen. What I was going to say is we have actually had an hour already, so this is becoming too long. Can I suggest we log out, and I'll send you a new link, and we'll start on another program to follow up on that issue. Is that okay?
Okay.
Did you get that one, Godfrey?
Hello? Yeah. You are saying you want to log out and start a fresh one.
I'll start a new program, yeah, and send you a new link in about 10 minutes. And then we can carry on from where we left off, yeah?
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Yes, there is some noise coming from your end, Godfrey. There we are. We have got to stop at that point, and we'll record a follow-up on this program to discuss this issue of sanctions and why ordinary Zimbabweans have failed to differentiate between the propaganda of ZANU-PF, the wishy-washy noise coming from the opposition, and come up with a position, a well-articulated position for themselves. Thank you very much.